September 10, 1989, Captain John Hager of the Castlewood Fire Department lost his life after a roof collapse at a commercial structure fire in Greenwood Village, Colorado. Captain Hager and his crew on Squirt 35 had been called in as a partial second alarm. The purpose of this video is to remember Captain Hager and the sacrifice he and his family made. We will also revisit the lessons of that fire in order to prevent other line-of-duty deaths and injuries.
Engine 32, Engine 31, Truck 32, Rescue 31, respond to map Robert 28 on a possible structure fire on the south side of Yosemite and Bellevue.
Hello? This is the fire department. Go ahead.
Yes, there's a fire burning on the corner of Yosemite and Bellevue. It's the southwest corner. It's where the hair lift and...
It's where the what is?
The hair lift and the Maxwell's King used to be.
Okay. The hair lift and that...
Station 31 responding.
201.
It was a visible fire as we approached. I could see the fire coming from the Paradise Cleaner sign. It was maybe I'd say shoebox kind of size, not very much flame, just kind of flame coming from behind the sign.
Engine 31, Engine 32, be advised, we got fire the back of the structure at Paradise Cleaners. Looks like it's coming through the roof.
We came around the back of the building and staged right in this area here is where we were staged, and could see the fire coming out of the sign.
Engine 31 on the scene, Yosemite Bellevue. We do have fire coming through the attic structure, it looks like, on Paradise Cleaners.
Our first assignment was to hit the hydrant.
Engine 32, can you lay us a line?
And it ended up being about 800 feet. I think we used every stick of hose coming across there.
I met with Acting Lieutenant Ron Barron at the rear of the structure. He was first in and had taken command prior to my arrival. So I met with him and talked to him about what he had found and what we were going to do. And then at that point, I moved to the east side of the structure and set up command out there.
Control, Battalion 3.
Battalion 3.
I've assumed command on the scene. Go ahead and send me another engine and Squirt 35.
We knew it was a working fire and it was going pretty good. And we were moving pretty fast. I still remember hitting a good bump and bouncing Hager off the ceiling, so we knew we were ready to work.
Control 1, Squirt 35.
Squirt 35.
Do you have a fire ground channel for Yosemite yet?
That's affirmative, sir. Fire ground 3, fire ground channel 3.
So the discussion was, get a crew up on the roof and see what we find there, and maybe get our second crew at the front door of the restaurant and look at that. And at that point, I really don't think we appreciated what we had. We thought it was kind of a low-grade call at that point.
Squirt 35 on scene, Yosemite.
Squirt 35, 224.
Our first assignment was to go in and relieve or assist Engine 32 that had pulled the first line into these front doors. When we made entry through these doors, it was almost coming up like to a wall of smoke. It took us to our knees really quick, real dense smoke, but yet we had no heat.
I think that whole night things went slowly built up and escalated, and then as they escalated, it was just a freight train. It's getting worse and worse and worse.
Captain Hager climbed the ladder with the hose line. He opened the nozzle for, just a few moments. And what I specifically remember about that was that what we got back was kind of scalding water. It was extremely hot, so there was obviously more fire than we kind of thought, or I thought we were dealing with.
And that's when I walked up to the front of the parapet to make sure that the command was getting the sense of what I was, at that point I was kind of calling it quits.
I still remember the building groaning.
That's when it blew and went up in the air.
A lot of the drop ceiling, the light fixtures, the wiring, all those things were down.
It blew me back, the percussion, down the ladder and it just all of a sudden happened.
My partners, everybody was screaming for the hose line because when that concussion came in, they got blown off the hose line and they were yelling, hose, hose.
A large amount of fire and embers go up in the sky. Way more than I would ever thought would happen. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that before.
And it's at that point that I heard Captain Hager saying, "I'm trapped, I'm trapped, I'm trapped."
Castlewood firefighters were battling a 3-alarm fire when 4 firefighters found themselves trapped inside a smoky building.
Hi, can you send another ambulance to that structure fire? No, I think they might have got somebody hurt or something, because they don't usually ask for more ambulances. Yeah, you better send it to code 3.
3-alarm fire early this morning in Greenwood Village ends in tragedy for a veteran firefighter.
A firefighter in Greenwood Village is dead, and investigators are still trying to figure out tonight what caused a shopping center roof to collapse on top of him.
John was a firefighter's firefighter. I mean, he was the kind of guy that he was always there for everyone else.
Fun-loving guy, had a boat. He did like to have a good time and enjoyed his time off quite a bit.
When he was in the Navy, he had been a diver and a photographer. And so he was one of the first guys that I remember coming on and trying to kind of get a dive team going.
Yeah, he was very, very giving of himself.
Real good with the driving that old Mac. A lot of engineers struggled with that. He seemed to have quite the knack for it. Early in my career, our captain used to bring his dog to the firehouse. He got this new chow puppy, and John used to take, he used to love to get a glass of water and go back and just dump it on the carpet and then call the captain to clean up after his dog. And the captain would be on a dead run to do it, and he'd be apologetic, and hey, the next shift he'd do the same thing. Okay, that was always kind of a cute one. So he was quite the prankster. He was a pretty funny guy. John was a regular guy, and he worked hard at this job, and he had a lot of pride in it. Our inspection program was okay, especially for that time. We weren't really into pre-planning. That wasn't a big push. It was, you know, for the high rises only. We didn't see really push the need to do it on our mid-rises or strip malls, for instance. Minimum staffing was 1. Most time you had 2. You did have 1 radio per rig.
You were very limited. There always could have been more people and it would have helped, but it wasn't something that you thought, I can't do what I need to do. It was just, you just made do with what you had, the people and the equipment.
We had been raised here to, you know, do with less.
We were real competent at the small instances because the single-family dwellings, we could knock it out of the park. But the bigger fires that don't happen so often seem like more of a struggle as far as fireground organization to strategy and tactics.
We'd always wanted the one that really challenged us, and I think that was Greenwood City Chops. For me, that was the first big one that really challenged us, because that was quite the fire. Fire has a definite way of humbling you, and I think that was September 10th.
We had a fire just south of Arapahoe Road on Yosemite, and 6841 is the address, I think it is. And we ended up with 22 people that jumped out of the windows and had people trapped. You could hear screaming, and the first in officer had been hit by a big piece of glass. And this fire on September 10th didn't seem like anything approaching those types of fires. I thought I had it all kind of figured out. Not so much. That's the day that you kind of go, wow, not so much.
It started out to be a regular day. I lived fairly close to John, and he called me up the night before because his truck was in the shop. Hey, can you give me a ride to work? Go, come pick you up. And you know, it's vivid as yesterday. You know, I pulled up in front of his house, waiting for him to come out. Sherry meets him at the door, hands him a cup of coffee, kisses him goodbye. The kids are there, hugging Dad goodbye. You know, and T-Hop comes walking out, hops in my car, and we go off to work. And I can just remember that vivid, you know, and it was a regular day, you know, and I used to think that was such a tragedy, and then now as I get older and have my own family and stuff, I think it was kind of a nice, it might have been 30 seconds, but they all had a chance to say goodbye to Dad.
A few minutes before 2 a.m. on Sunday, September 10, 1989, someone driving by the Sunset Shopping Center in Greenwood Village saw the fire and stopped to warn a man who was working very late preparing for a grand opening.
The guy jumped out, was running to my door, and I opened the door and he says, "Your building's on fire, get out."
The passerby then went to a nearby gas station and called in the fire.
Emergency? Yeah, this is Denver Fire. We have a call from a man at the Exxon station in Yosemite, Bellevue. Rescue 31, what is it?
158.
Building next door to that place on fire.
Yosemite and Bellevue. Okay, well, we'll send somebody out there.
Okay.
Okay.
At 2:01, 4 units of Castlewood Fire were dispatched. Those 2 engines, ladder truck and medic unit, had a total of 9 firefighters, joined a couple minutes later by a battalion chief.
Battalion 3 on the scene, Yosemite and Bellevue.
Battalion 3, 210.
The Sunset Shopping Center looked in 1989 much like it does now, a single-story building with multiple occupancies, lightweight wood truss construction, which in places is supported by a metal truss.
I was acting officer on Engine 31.
Who was on the rig with you that night on 31?
Rob Hinsberg was my engineer.
Any firefighters?
No. Dispatch 2, I believe it was a possible structure fire. As we pulled into the shopping center, there was one of the guys that works here, I think he was from the print shop, was out in the front parking lot and flagged us around. You know, this is 2 o'clock in the morning. Flagged us around and said that there's a fire in the back of the building. Immediately, the rescue unit, John Armstrong, Steve Ferguson, pulled an 1.5-inch line off our engine. Rob put it in pump, and they started to attack the fire in the sign. At that time, I radioed to 32 and said, "Give me a supply line," and they brought me a 5-inch supply line up the back driveway here, laid into my engine, and then Dennis Welling, Captain Welling, and I decided at the time that we were going to connect a 2.5-inch relay line to him so he could go around the front and take care of anything on the front. So that's what we did.
Barron initially assumed command on the west side of the building at what appeared to be the back of Paradise Cleaners.
It wasn't long after these guys started their attack on the sign fire that I could tell that it was deeper seated. And at that time, Rob and I had gone up to this door right back here and forced entry. Encountered light smoke, no heat, virtually no heat, light smoke and no fire. When I came back out, these guys were still trying to put this sign out, but I could see the soffit deteriorating, so pulled them back out of it right away, and it came down pretty quick after that, this part of the soffit. So I knew it was deeper seated than that, and that's when I called to Truck 32 and said, "Can you get me in the front of Paradise Cleaners?"
Went into dry cleaners, and it was like, it's really just a storefront. And I remember giving a report, well, there's nothing here. You can't get to the back from here, and I'm not going to be able to get to the sign.
So they forced entry into the front of Paradise Cleaners and report back to me that there's nothing going on in here. We got a little bit of light smoke, but that's it. There's nothing else going on.
Meanwhile, the team from Rescue 31 had taken a line to the roof.
When they got up there was, you know, they didn't report anything that, you know, out of the ordinary to me. There wasn't anything going on, you know, not much going on that they could tell.
After taking command, Acting Battalion Chief Bill Swenson assigned Barron as rear sector officer and put Captain Welling in charge of the front sector.
First orders was to get a second crew to the front of the building and a line into the Marco Polo restaurant to get an idea of if we had extension into the restaurant. It wasn't until I had repositioned and moved out front that I got a call from the back of the structure when Ron said, you know, this door doesn't go into the cleaners. It's in the back of the restaurant.
There was no pre-plan for this building in 1989. Nothing to say from the outside that the Marco Polo extended behind Paradise Cleaners.
The visible fire I saw upon arrival was at a sign saying Paradise Cleaners. And that when I came around to the front, there was also another sign at the front that said Paradise Cleaners and the doors going into that. I assumed that that was an occupancy that ran from front to back called Paradise Cleaners.
So as Welling and Walker advanced into the restaurant, pulling ceiling tiles, they had zero visibility, but no heat, and thought they were next door to the business that was on fire. Meanwhile, Ladder 32's crew had been ordered to the roof with Rescue 31.
When I got to the roof, the most important thing to me was seeing a little bit of fire in the rear coming over the parapet, and that there was a little bit of fire around HVAC units. So my initial thing was, okay, we have fire back there, and it's not good because it's around the equipment.
There had been some radio traffic about, during this, while we were coming in, about some fire coming around an air handling unit at the rear, so for all crews to stay out of the rear of the structure. So I decided, well, we were next door to where we kind of thought the fire was, but we would stay short of the middle, or right at, not go any farther than the middle.
Squad 35 on ping affirmative.
Squad 35, 224.
When Squirt 35 arrived, Captain Hager and firefighter Ullery were assigned to the front sector.
So we made entry and hooked up with the crew from Engine 32. And I made 2 trips out, getting a couple of tools. Came out and got an attic ladder one time, and then made another exit to get a set up light right here at the door.
A few minutes later, Squirt 35's engineer, Rob Keller, was assigned to take a saw to the roof, where the crews were having difficulty cutting through the gravel and tar.
Took a ground ladder from Engine 32, raised it probably 50 feet south of the entrance, came up single story. As I came up, cresting over the roof, my first visual was seeing what I believe was fire coming around the large HVACs on the ceiling.
Below, Captain Welling's low air warning was going off, but up on the attic ladder, it appeared Captain Hager had found the fire.
Heard them talking, okay, we hit a hot patch, we got the fire, and you actually did hear the steam conversion.
Out back, Engine 31 was keeping the fire from spreading any further to the south, but on the roof, conditions were deteriorating rapidly.
I walked around again to just get another feel of what was going on, and it was just not getting a good feeling. It was getting springy. The fire in the HVAC stuff was getting worse.
Steve said he was going to get off the roof with paramedic Armstrong. I said, I'll watch you get off.
And that's when I walked up to the front of the parapet to make sure that the command was getting the sense of what I was, at that point I was kind of calling it quits. That's when I came to the parapet. I called the incident commander. We had a verbal on the radio with a visual pointing at each other. Am I talking to you? Yeah, you're talking to me. And I gave him, this is bad. We're gonna get off.
When he called to me on the portable that night, and hanging over the front of the wall, and I remember looking at him across the parking lot in the dark with the lights flashing, and him pointing at me and talking on the radio and saying, "This thing's, it's not good."
Went on the radio and said emergency traffic to command, indicating that we should evacuate the building.
And he was calling to get out of the building and off the roof. And it was right at that moment that I realized that this is a big deal. This had turned into something much more than we had anticipated in the way we set up for the call.
He sprayed the water, and at that time I remember thinking, well, my air bell's been going off, but I could walk down the hose right out the front door, and I was pretty sure that I could cover that distance and hold my breath if I needed to.
There was a little bit of relief that we'd actually found the seat of the fire, so now we knew what we were dealing with, we thought.
Maybe 20 to 30 seconds after that, the roof came in. It was in a big explosion type feel, concussion type, rocked your body.
And it just all of a sudden happened. I could hear the boom and feel the heat and feel the shock wave a little bit.
It was within 30 seconds of them getting to that side, which was fortunate in the fact that I was the only one who was there, and just happened to be lucky because I was in the middle. I think if you would have been standing up here on the front at this edge, and you would have been here when it fell, you would have fallen through because there was a gap from here to the parapet. I just happened to be in the middle of the trampoline, so to speak, and had my choices of which way to go.
I just remember that moment where the roof disappeared, fire got up in the sky, all the embers. It was an amazing amount of embers from what I remember. Way more than I would ever thought would happen. I'd never seen anything like that before. It was new. But I remember it hitting, I remember the amount of fire in the sky, and I remember realizing that all of a sudden I had 10 firefighters that I was going to have to account for.
It was something that I perceived more than I could put my finger on. I still remember the kind of the building groaning, I suppose. But when that happened, I dove from the hose right under some tables that were right in front of me. It was at that point that the collapse occurred. So I dove kind of as soon as I stopped moving, the collapse occurred, and I remember that something had fallen close to me that was large enough to knock my teeth together.
It was pitch black at that point in time. It had been, we were working in pitch black the whole time. And I think I just got blown to the floor and face down, and just kind of was kind of out of it a little bit, just shaking. And luckily I landed on the hose. I realized that I was laying on the hose. So that's how I landed.
I heard a sound, kind of a muffled crunching sound, and I felt the drop ceiling hit me. The frame was around my neck, kind of right in the corner. I think I took one more step after that, and then the rest of it came down, knocking me down away from the hose line towards the front of the building.
I was terrified. Everything running through my body, I'm going to die any minute here. Changing in conditions, at that point, everything changed. We had heat started building. We did have some fire that had fallen out of the ceiling area when the collapse came in. And the thing that brought me back to my, bringing me back was my partners that everybody was screaming for the hose line.
I kind of spun around under the table and was coming back out for the hose line. I had a light on, but what I remembered, I could see my hands grabbing the hose, and I could see other gloves grabbing the hose.
But I crawled not very far, just a couple feet, and realized that now I need to stay. The captain's bell's been going off for a while. I need to stay where I'm at, see what happened to them. So I turned around. I was able to turn around, and I could see them laying on the floor. I could see the flashlights coming towards me.
As I was crawling down the hose, I remember seeing bits and pieces of his reflective gear. Kind of through the smoke, I could see him moving. He was kind of parallel on the hose. So I reached out and got a hold of his coat, pulled him in behind me, and firefighter Ullery got his hands back on the hose.
And then firefighter Ullery came by. I'm still trying to find it in all the debris or whatever, and he grabbed my hands and said, "No, it's right here."
My air bell was still going off at that moment in time. The now firefighter Walker's air bell was also going off. As I started to go down the hose, we were met by a lot of different things. A lot of the drop ceiling, the light fixtures, the wiring, all those things were down kind of at floor level. So I was trying to push some of that stuff out of the way, and it was about that time that Captain Hager hollered that he was trapped.
I remember stopping when I heard him yell, "Hey, I'm trapped back here," and raising up, and all I can see is fire. Whatever I raised up into was on fire. It was nothing but orange.
My other two teammates from Engine 32 headed out, and I was paused. And like you're taught in the academy, you don't leave without your partner. And I was paused and waiting for him to catch up with me. And at that time, the heat really intensified to a point where my body took over and said, "I have to leave." And at that point, I did hear Captain Hager say, "I'm trapped, I'm trapped." And unfortunately, something I live with every day is that, that moment of your body taking over, and I had no tools. I didn't have the hose line. I had to get outside and get some help.
The first thing I did was I raised up kind of in the smoke on my knees, trying to see if I could see where he was, and I couldn't see anything. So then I got on the radio and I declared that it was a firefighter down, and I repeated that several times, and that I think the firefighter was trapped and that we needed help. As we approached the door, I remember seeing the end of the counter from the cash register, that kind of where you come into a restaurant, you can see the counter. And the lean-to, kind of the collapse part, was over that counter, and it was kind of broke. And there was a little hole where I could see light coming from. And it wasn't very big, but as I approached that hole, I went out that hole.
I was unaware that they'd put a light at the front door, and I saw the light, and I kind of had an inkling of that might be the front door. My thought was I'd already lost the hose once. I wasn't letting go of it for nothing the second time. So there was excess hose, a loop of hose inside the front door. Basically, I'd started to follow that past the front door. And I believe table where he reached in and grabbed me. You know, he saw me go by the front door, reached in, grabbed me, and pulled me out.
When I only saw 3 come out of the front door, that's when it really became a scramble.
When I came out the hole, Captain Jim McMillan was standing there. I told him that John was trapped on the end of this hose line. I remember standing and pointing with my toe, it's this hose line. He's trapped and he's on the end of it.
I grabbed my engineer, Rob Keller, and also Steve Nassau that was working on the ladder. He was down at that time, and I just grabbed him by the collar and said, hey, John's still in there, John's still in there, we've got to get back in there.
In the hectic minutes after Welling, Ullery, and Walker crawled out of the restaurant, many firefighters made heroic efforts to save Captain Hager.
The battalion chief said as soon as he saw us come out the door, he could see flames probably 30 feet in the air.
You know, there wasn't very many of us here. We started grabbing whoever we could grab. I remember Steve Nassau was one. 33s was pretty close to the front door, if I remember right, like almost right there.
A couple guys get burned there at the front door trying to get in, and we're unable to get really past that counter and through that little hole.
I tried to initiate a rescue. I got inside. A lot of lean-to collapse, a lot of access problems. At that point, a lot of heat.
Paradise Cleaners, which is where I thought the fire should have been, was still basically intact, so I had a crew go in, go over the counter, and breach the wall, trying to come into where I thought John was. Also ordered another crew to try to breach the brick wall in front of about where I thought he was.
Communications had come through that we had firefighters trapped, we'd gotten them out, we had one more trapped inside. I didn't know who it was at the time. And they came out back and said, put your deck gun on that area. And I came back, I went back on the radio and said, confirming. You want the deck gun, you want our Engine 31 deck gun played in this area. Because I didn't know, I thought we still had crews in there. I didn't know what had gone on, I didn't know who was still trapped. And it came back affirmative.
At one point, my bunkers were on fire, and it just, you know, that was the point where I knew we weren't going to get him, so backed out.
The fire was even more intense at that point. I thought, you know, whoever's in there, we're not going to get them out unless they were moving on the way out.
I was ordering a guy to put water on a roof that was on top of a firefighter, so I could either drown him, crush him, or maybe extinguish the fire, but there was really no good choice. We weren't making entry from the front, trying to put out as much fire as we could so the fire didn't consume him, but...
To send people in on 1.5 inches with no backup lines, no crews in place, I mean, we would just be throwing 3 more people into the fire, or 4, or whatever. I mean, I remember that very vividly, having to discuss that quite a bit with several people on the fire ground. And it was one of those decisions that, to this day, you know, it will always haunt me, but I always feel I made the right decision in keeping everybody out till we had water.
There was a period of time there fairly early where we're trying to save John, and it becomes pretty obvious to me that we've probably lost John, and the most likely scenario will be more firefighters going to get killed trying to pull this off, specifically at the front door. So it was the order to have them withdraw that was probably the most difficult order in my careers.
I mean, we got the second line laid, got an aerial up, got water in place. I mean, we scrambled. We had people working hard the first 5 minutes of the collapse to try and get back in. You know, unfortunately, John was gone at that point, and to this day, you know, we can't change that.
An official review of the fire came to the same conclusion, saying that due to Captain Hager's location near this steel truss beam, he was, quote, trapped by the lean-to type collapse of the roof trusses, and went on to say, quote, we feel it was physically impossible for the other team members to rescue Captain Hager because of his location under the collapsed end of the trussed roof section that had failed. All 3 firefighters who survived had been moving towards the front of the building, 2 to change air bottles, and the 3rd to pull more hose into the building. Those few steps may have made the difference. Would more resources, more water, and personnel made a difference in the rescue attempt? The report says, quote, had these resources been available, due to the collapse and subsequent complete involvement of fire in this area, the successful rescue of Captain Hager could not have been accomplished, and in fact, would have resulted in further deaths and injuries.
Firefighters say they tried to get Hager out, but a wall of flames stopped any possible rescue.
I feel very, very bad for the fireman's wife. It's just everything else can be replaced except that. That's a tragedy.
Investigators spent 8 straight days combing what was left of the north end of the shopping center. They found evidence which led them to believe the fire was intentionally set, but no one was ever charged. The case is still considered an open homicide by Greenwood Village Police.
One of the things we noticed after getting back together, there was a lot of warning signs, and we failed to put all the pieces together in time.
Today, minimum staffing levels, the number of firefighters sent on a first alarm, equipment, training, and pre-planning all have improved. So why revisit such a painful event now? And what can John Hager's death still teach us at a distance of 20 years?
We've had 2 or 3 pretty darn close ones since then, and it just makes me cringe to think that somebody almost walked into the same thing that we did. And I view that as personal. That's my fault, because they didn't know. I didn't tell them. So I think, that's part of the never forget. That's the best way we can honor John is to take the time to do this and make sure that, our crews are safe. They know what they're getting into when we get into these structures. We all knew that was a wood truss building. We've all read that it fails, and I think we all have a pretty good, vivid description of failure now.
This day and age, we got great equipment, but we've got great training. We've improved a lot. 20 years makes a big difference. The bottom line is we're still fighting fire. We still have lightweight construction. We can still kill somebody any day of the week.
In fact, the danger posed by commercial buildings has not changed in 20 years. Firefighter deaths and injuries are more common at commercial structures than anywhere else. The shopping center where John Hager died burned again in 1995. Again, the roof collapsed.
We filmed at that building yesterday, and we looked up, and what was it built of?
It's exactly the same as that day.
It's wood truss.
It is, after they rebuilt it 2 or 3 times.
Exactly the same. So there's going to be a crew of none of us that can arrive at that building tonight at 2 in the morning, and they're going to have the exact same thing. That's the answer right there. Nothing's changed that building.
The same dangers exist today, here and in thousands of buildings like it. If they catch fire, firefighters should do a thorough size-up and weigh their options carefully.
We've learned a hard lesson here, and we can't let that go by. We have to pass this on. I think I'm still a really aggressive firefighter, but the big thing I know now is there's times when you can't be aggressive. There's times when we need to step back and evaluate, make sure we know what we got before we commit to one of these.
Risk reward. We preach that now, and I think it's been even more evident recently. And it's the old saying, if a baby's not hanging from the window, then we got all the time in the world.
Evaluating that building, reading that fire book. What does it look like? Where's it going to go? And that was something I think the department has gotten, I think the members have gotten much better about. I believe we're a better department. Our training is so much better, and our ability to recognize those hazards and to say, hey, this is a loser. Let's get everybody out.
In 1989, there was no Rapid Intervention Team, or RIT, standing by in case a firefighter went down. Even if it had been policy, they simply didn't have the people.
The night that John died, there were firefighters dying all over the country in strip malls and roof collapses. We did the job with minimum staffing back then. If I could have changed that back then, I would have.
The rescue efforts were emotionally charged. Our training was inadequate in the industry at that time. We now have RIT, and we trained thoroughly on preparing for that. It was a lot of well-intended effort, but at the time, everybody was winging it. I was going in the front door by myself, which was a mistake. I had a better idea where he was at. In hindsight, I wish I would have gathered myself and got the necessary resources and possibly made another vantage point rather than going to the front door. Come to find out, there was NASA was going through the back door by himself. So
when we step back and then we do have to make this rescue attempt or get back into the building, we all focus on having gone in the building one way and coming out the building the same direction, and then we're going to re-enter it the same way. There has to be that more pronged approach of let's go a different way.
There's a reason Mayday procedures now exist, a reason rapid intervention teams are assigned at fires, and a compelling reason for knowing and following those policies.
There was a point in time at that fire where mainly what I could see we were going to lose more guys. The rescue effort was going to the level that someone else was going to die, probably multiples.
The accountability has become such an intricate part of our job now. You know, we all want to go home in the morning. We don't want to leave anybody behind on these calls. And knowing where your crews are and who's on what crews and what they're doing is I think, one of the most important components of running a call like this.
In 1989, usually only the officer had a portable radio, but there were no lapel mics. It was even more of a strain to hear over the chaos and noise of the fire ground.
I remember sitting up on the engine 31, and we had the deck gun going, and we had a line going to you. You can imagine what that engine was doing. It was screaming.
20 years ago, all radio traffic was directed at and channeled through the incident commander.
There had been some radio traffic about some fire coming around an air handling unit at the rear. You know, I probably should have had some follow-up questions at that point, but since it's going to the IC and not directed at me, I'm not really responding to it, I'm just listening to it.
It's easy to get tunnel vision and focus only on the task at hand, but listening, observing, and communicating is everyone's job.
It's important that everybody on scene is an integral part of the team, and everybody has a responsibility for identifying problems or potential problems or safety concerns, or I tell my people gut feeling. If something feels wrong, there's a good chance that something's wrong, and it's best to speak out and identify that, and we'll adjust or not from there.
I had this feeling, you know, and I didn't say anything. I thought, you know, something's wrong. You know, we got a ton of smoke in here. We had seen no fire. The fire wasn't supposed to be where we were at, and it just wasn't making sense. And I wish I'd have said something.
In the initial firefight, you know, in the initial 10 or 15 minutes of an incident, it's going to be basics. Okay, you've got to get you've got to get a line in there. You've got to get some ventilation going. You've got to get utilities taken care of. You've got to get a search initiated. So that's all basic stuff.
The basics include pre-plans. That night, pre-plans could have helped eliminate confusion over the layout of the structure.
From my perspective, we were next door to the fire. So, you know, if you're talking about a little fire coming through the roof or it's sagging, it's always next door to where we were, which wasn't true. It was really about where we were.
In addition to pre-plans, a thorough size-up should include things like using a pike pole to gauge ceiling height. A pole which can reach the bottom of the roof drain outside should be long enough to reach into the ceiling inside.
I did not anticipate the insulation being on the bottom of the trusses. In hindsight, bringing a pike pole capable of reaching the bottom of the roof would be an important tool for an inside crew to have with them.
Regardless of your rank, your assignment, or the tools you carry, do your own size up. It could save your life or the life of a teammate.
I was so focused on pulling the line, you know, getting it ready to go in, that I never looked at the front of the building. I never saw where the other exits were, you know. You want to have that plan B. If things go bad, how do I get out of here?
From this day on, I'll size up any fire that we're on from what I learned at this fire. There's some very basic things that I'll look at.
If things do go wrong, your training can also get you out of a jam.
What saved me that night was the basic maze drill at the academy. And so I think your basics are just, everything comes back down to basics. Don't get complacent. You've got to know back in the back of your head that this could be the one.
There are many lessons from September 10th, 1989. The benefits of pre-plans, the need for a secondary water supply, the benefits of having a team assigned to RIT, the need for additional personnel earlier, and the need for everyone on every fire scene to listen carefully to radio traffic and to make sure critical information is clearly being communicated to everyone on the fire ground. The lessons that night were all learned at a great cost. The people who were there sincerely hope no one now has to learn them as painfully as they did.
It's 20 years later, and it's still, I can still picture my, driving on engine 31 into that parking lot. I mean, it's vivid to me.
There were a lot of mistakes made that night. We need to identify those and make adjustments. And we can't identify them unless we get step one and a little bit of humility on our end and say, hey, I could have done better.
I think every firefighter that gets to see this tape or is involved in fighting fire has to remember that those that passed before us, they made a commitment that none of us really want to do. But everything that happened that night we've evaluated, we've looked at, we've made changes. You know, we're still working on it. You know, the communication thing, you know, we'll always work on that. But we've looked at, you know, how we did it, our water supply, the number of people in a truck, the size hose we carry, the type of nozzles we're pulling. You know, John didn't die in vain. John died and made us be better at our job, and he does it to me every day I go to work.
Among the first 10 people on scene, 5 were acting in their positions that night. 20 years distant, we can't judge how or if that influenced events. What we can say to today's acting officers and engineers is, you need to be ready.
I do believe that, you know, that an acting officer at that point is not just a substitute in there, to babysit. He's got the full responsibility of that crew, and as such, the crew, you know, he's got to have confidence in his abilities, as does the crew. Otherwise, things are not going to go as hoped.
Bad things happen, and it's a dangerous profession, and you've got to do your best to be ready for that.
We owe this to John to make, you know, this lesson that we learned, and I mean, his family paid a huge price, and you know, we have a duty to pass this on so that we don't have to learn this lesson again. Once is enough.
John coached our basketball team. We had a couple tournaments with a couple other departments around the area. And I remember somebody was complaining that, you know, the guy that he was guarding, it was an Arapahoe County Sheriff, or we thought they were deputies, I think they were inmates, but complaining to John about it. And John said, well, how about if you're getting too beat up, we could put some kerosene on your socks. And the basketball player said, what are you talking about? He said, well, that'll keep the ants off your candy ass.